Hello and welcome again to another episode of One Starfish, where our mission is to help change the world one starfish or one person at a time. As always, guys, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, share. That's how we get the word out about what we do. Excited for our guest today. He was going off about a lot of stuff before, so I want to make sure we capture it. So we're going to get started. Kevin Howard lives in Oregon in a beautiful area. He can go into that a little bit more. 4 years ago, he started his business in climate risk management, but he's been in that industry for 6, 7 years. 25 years, a military veteran, doing a lot of amazing things. Also, we're going to get into author, all that kind of good stuff. So we're going to get into story. Thanks for being on the show, Kevin.
Thank you so much, Angela, for inviting me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Yes. So let's get into things. What got you into the military way back? That was, I guess, was that your first kind of step into as an adult? Was that your first kind of choice out of childhood, teenagerhood
It
kind of
was.
thing? Okay.
I joined the military before my 18th birthday, right after I graduated high school, back in and just dating myself, November 15th, 1983. You know, so I wasn't quite 18. I turned 18 November 30th. But no, I'm a second generation American. My mother was born and raised in Panama, and she really, really had an appreciation for America because she grew up outside of the country and came to America, and so she instilled in me and my brother this patriotic passion for the country. So the first thing I wanted to do in making my way was to serve. And so I served active duty in the military. I was a nuclear biological chemical NCO for what turned out to be the a first generation M1 tanking unit in NATO. Colin Powell was our corps commander before he got selected to be President Reagan's assistant national security advisor and went on the political track of his career. But he was a lieutenant general when I served for him. And so that's why I joined. I just passionately loved the country, wanted to give back, to the country that gave everything to my mom and she gave everything to us. So it became a very natural progression to start my career. Also, I wanted to get money for college. I wanted to earn it on my own. so so that was my motivation.
Well, you keep talking about your mom. Were you raised in a single parent childhood?
Um, well, okay, so my parents got divorced when I was 5, my brother was 7, and my father did go away, and I never did see him again. While I did talk to him, 2 different times thereafter, years later, when me and my wife were about to have our first son. But otherwise, yeah, my mom raised us alone. Yes.
Wow, your mom is a strong woman. How many siblings do you have?
Just one. My brother, he's 2 years older, and no, she is. I tell you, my mother is God's truest sign of love in this world for me. She still lives nearby. She's in Camas, Washington, and I live in Hood River, Oregon, which is across the Columbia River.
That's awesome. Well, that explains, a little bit of where you're coming from, for sure. Then you went into the military. You were there for 25 years. Is that correct?
No, no, no. And I want to correct that. I only
Okay.
served for 4 years, my first four
Okay.
years, and then I came out of the military, went to college,
Okay.
got my undergraduate degree in economics, and then went to law school and earned my law degree. But I became a banker. I always wanted to be a banker, and so it was the 25-year career was in banking, and
Okay.
then that career then morphed as I have a passionate love for nature and the environment. And I discovered, along with many people, with Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, that we have a problem in global warming. That started to consume my attention. And I transitioned my career from commercial lending, commercial banking, to climate risk management and sustainability.
So, what exactly is climate risk management and sustainability in layman's terms?
Yeah, let's talk in layman's terms. Okay. Because there's so much, as with most issues, there's so much distortion in this space.
Hmm.
So let's talk. Everything I'm going to say comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a United Nations group of global scientists representing 195 nations, everyone you know, right? And they, starting in 1988, started examining three basic questions. What is the evidence for the human-induced warming warming of the planet due to greenhouse gas emissions. Okay. Two, to what is the latest research on how we could adapt to the effects of that warming? And then three, what is the latest research available on how we can reduce the impacts, reduce the warming itself? Okay, so the IPCC, in an Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, produces these massive reports every 7 years, and they've been doing it since 1988. Each one of these reports are about 2,000 pages long. So so that's 6,000 pages or so, because it's a global meta-analysis on these three questions. But they understand that policymakers are not going to read the 6,000 pages. So then they have something called a summary for policymakers, which is 40 pages long. And in that 40 pages, what makes it unique is that all 195 member nations, the best nonprofit, not-for-profit scientists around the globe must agree. So it's a unanimous document. It is a global consensus. There is no other, on any other subject, that is more definitive than this subject, And so everything I'm going to say comes out of the summary for policymakers for the most recent, assessment. So you're going back to your question. What is global climate change? Well, for coming out, and this is a global phenomenon, so you got to bear with me for a moment. Coming out of the Ice Age, 15,000 years ago, right? One of the things that made the Ice Age is that the global average surface temperature of the planet would fluctuate wildly, 2 degrees, 4 degrees, up and down or whatever. And that's the average surface temperature, but that accommodates Siberia and it accommodates the Caribbean and it accommodates, okay. So coming out of the Ice Age, the reason why we came out of the Ice Age is that global average surface temperature started stabilizing. And then, so 15,000 years ago, it started compressing and stabilizing instead of this wild fluctuation where civilization wasn't possible because the weather patterns were too severe. So for the next 5,000 years, while it was diminishing, the weather started improving. Okay, so then once you got past that first 5,000 years, for the next 10,000 years, the average global surface temperature on the planet was 56 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take 2 degrees, for 10,000 years. This produced a pattern of weather around the world that allowed primitive hunter-gatherer humanity to use pattern recognition to create farming. Okay. Farming allowed groups to have excess food, which became the basis for trade and ultimately led to the modern economy. Okay. So this is the relationship between the temperature, the weather, food production, right? And ultimately commerce. But when we started then back in the mid 1800s, around 1850, with the invention of the internal combustion engine, we started using fossil fuels as the energy to fuel the developing modern economy, the new industrial economy. Okay, those emissions from from oil, natural gas, coal, right? They're called greenhouse gas emissions because, in its basic chemistry, they carbon and methane absorb sunlight. So normally the sun shines, hits the surface of the planet, bounces up through the sky, and goes out into space. These emissions hover in our atmosphere, and carbon can last a couple of hundred years. Methane lasts about 50 years, right? And so we are putting all this carbon in the atmosphere because we're using fossil fuels as our energy source. And what it's doing is it's holding the sunlight in the atmosphere, and that's warming the planet. And so that temperature of 56 degrees Fahrenheit that has been stable for 10,000 years, that allowed us to develop the whole modern economy, that allowed us to innovate farming and stuff like that. We have warmed that temperature since 1850 to about 59 degrees. And what it's doing is creating a series of weather patterns that we have not experienced in the modern economy because we've never been this warm before, right? The higher that temperature goes out of the 56 degree, basic historical level, the more our weather patterns are different than anything we've ever experienced. And the evidence of this is that weather-related events, extreme weather-related events costing in excess of $1 billion have tripled since the 1980s as we have exceeded that 2-degree standard deviation that we lived within since, for 10,000 years. And so this is what global warming has produced. It's produced a change in our climate, and that change in our climate is producing extreme weather events, everything from drought to flooding to forest fires, sea level rise, numerous ones. And that's costing billions and billions of dollars right now. And threatens, and literally threatens, humanity as a whole. And so this is what I got into. That once I started realizing how severe this was, and this is what Al Gore was talking about in Inconvenient Truth, like in 2002 or something, 2003 or whatever, is that the only way to mitigate this problem is we have to transition out of fossil fuels to renewable energy. And this is where the big fight is, because we're talking trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to do that.
So back to there's a lot of information. I love it. What back to the original question. So what is it you do with climate risk management? What exactly are you doing with banks, or did you do with banks to talk to them about? Is that
Yes.
what you talked about, with switching from certain kind of energy to another kind of energy? Is that basically what it is in a nutshell?
It is okay. First and foremost, it is understanding. With any risk, you got to understand what is the risk, what is the nature of the risk. The problem is this is a science problem. I was a banker, and so bankers are not used to dealing with science problems. They're used to dealing with market problems, economic problems, financial problems. And so the first thing I did, what the bank hired me to do in this regard, was to educate them on what kind of risk is this. And so I had to go back to school and get the Sustainability and Climate Risk Certification that's offered by the Global Association of Risk Professionals. And so first it's education. What are we talking about here? It's sort of what I explained earlier. What is climate risk, or what is global warming? How is it real? How are humans causing it? What is the latest information that we know about it? You know, and what is the global consensus of what we know about it, all that. So I got educated on that and started to educate the risk management team, the enterprise risk management team for US Bank when I was there, to say, okay, this is a new risk, okay, that's going to affect the default rates for our financing. It's going to affect the operating performance of the businesses we invest in. And so how can we mitigate, how can we limit that risk? First is to understand what it is. Second is to recognize, okay, what can we do about it? We can adapt. In other words, we have collateral that secures our financing, so we can prepare that collateral to better weather drought, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, all that. That's one form of mitigation. Or we can participate in the process of slowing the warming down. And so a lender like US Bank, for example, just using them as an example, who has over $600 billion in credit, if they look at what is the climate related impact of the financing we provide to our customers, and how is that contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions, which is warming the planet? And can we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of the economic activities that we are financing? This is how you mitigate the impacts of climate on your default rates, is that you encourage, through your financing, people to transition, right? And so that was what I was doing. I was helping the bank to understand, okay, this is how we are contributing to this problem through our customers inadvertently. And this is how what we need to do to mitigate our own risk, is to transition out. And yeah, it's a very difficult message. Most banks are quite resistant to this, because again, it's profound a change to our economy, as the modern economy is experienced, shifting out of your energy system. But But it's becoming clearer and clearer that we must do it.
But what exactly do you do then now? Like now you're running your own consulting firm. What does a day in the life of Kevin look like?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So I advise other banks in this. I advise county governments on what climate risk is. One of the one A typical situation would be like, for example, I serve on Oregon has a offshore wind um, uh, roadmap roundtable that the state has asked experts to come together and assess pros and cons of us engaging in major offshore wind projects, off the coast of Oregon. And so I'm on that project, and so basically my day to day is helping to advise stakeholders on what is true about climate risk, about what is true about global warming, because these things have been politicized and they've been weaponized and they've been identified with this party versus that party. When the fact is that the atmosphere could care less about Republican or Democratic, conservative or liberal. It's basic chemistry, and as long as we keep on pumping carbon in the atmosphere, we're going to continue to warm the planet, and the effects are catastrophic.
That makes sense. That's awesome. And now you wrote a book called Onward. Tell us a little bit about the book and what prompted you to write it.
Yeah, the book is really an expression, and it's an ongoing book. It's my opus, I call it, because it's just going to be an ongoing expression of my life journey in terms of. So I was steeped and raised in the Christian faith, and so that that was a part of my lens, for the first, let's say, first half of my life. But progressively, as I started living my life, and I realized that as I chased the American dream and all the things that we are told as Americans we're supposed to do, what the measure of success is and all that, I found my life to be hollow. I found that I achieved. I had the great job, I had the family, I had the kids, I had the house, the toys, all that stuff, money in the bank, and I found no sense of purpose in it. And so then what that told me was that clearly I didn't know myself. And so I went into this like 10-year period where I was going inside myself to understand what is it that I truly believe? What is it that I truly valued? And what I learned in that process was most of the things that I had learned that was true in my life had came from the steeped wisdom of my lived experience, not from the virtues, values, or narratives that I was told. For example, I learned through that process of introspection that I don't live independently. That my aspiration for independence, which is a core value in America, right, which inspires me to make choices based on my own self-interest, right, right. Okay, that this was a self-defeating virtue, and why? Because I don't make the food that I eat. I don't make the clothes that I wear. I don't make the air that I breathe. I literally do not function independently, and nothing in nature functions independently. But there's a phrase for when you have a belief that belies the truth of how you live, and it's called cognitive dissonance, right? If you believe, I was setting my life up and basing my life on the virtues of competition. I was setting my life up on the virtues of independence, on the virtues of freedom. This notion of freedom is I can exercise my choices based on my own self-interest without consideration for you, Angela. Right? Right. Okay. These kind of choices are what has produced the toxicity in our current society. Right. And so I've and they simply are not in alignment with how we actually live. So I started, once I realized this and realized that this is probably why, even in the wealthiest country on the planet, so many of us don't have a strong sense of purpose that leads to fulfillment, is because of this disconnect between the beliefs and the narratives we're told and the wisdom of how we live, right? And so that's when I started writing. And I like writing. We live in a busy world, so I write I try to write in brief. So I call these shorter stories commentaries. And so I start writing these commentaries in my blog. And ultimately, in December of 2022, Atmosphere Press published my book of commentaries called Onward at Last. Then we got into the 2024 presidential election. And everything that I said in my published book in December 2022 was really was exaggerated in full vision, during the presidential election. So then I wrote another chapter called America at the Crossroads. I wrote another 21 commentaries. And I got a friend and a colleague, John Fullerton, who is a former investment banker, and he founded the Capital Institute. He wrote the foreword for the updated book of Onward at Last, and because he's also working on these problems. And then Atmosphere Press published that book in October of 2024. And so that's the book. That's why I wrote it. And I'd love to get into it if you have a little time to talk about it.
Awesome. Well, guys, I know there's lots in this. You guys will, all the book, all the information will be in the show notes as far as being able to access some of that and learning more about risk management and climate control and all of that kind of good stuff that Kevin has been chatting about here, and obviously very passionate about, which is super cool. You got to be passionate if you're gonna, go into something. What are some challenges that you've overcome or you've worked through to be able to get to the degree of success that you're at right now in your business?
Well, well, Angela, it is really, really hard to reassess your baseline values. And so the biggest challenge that I've had to overcome, because I live a life of purpose, I live a life of fulfillment at this point, because I was able to reconsider my core values. I mean, where do our core values come from? They're provided by the culture in which we're raised, by the family in which we're raised. And so, it's not a new critique. Philosophers historically have critiqued the idea of simply accepting these values and virtues without ever considering them, right? And so the biggest challenge I overcame was recognizing that these weren't serving me and reconsidering them and realigning how I make my choices, how I set up my life, how I see you and the rest of us as people, and how I understand the world based on what is true and not based on what I was told. And I think that more and more of us need to do that, because it's through the truth that we're empowered to then make thoughtful choices that align with reality, right? We have too many examples of fictions that bang up against reality and create catastrophic damage. Whether you're talking about the financial crash in 2008, 2009, that was a fiction created by Wall Street, right? Or you're talking about any of the issues that dominated the presidential election last year, like whether or not um, Russia's attack on Ukraine was an unprovoked attack. It all that is simply untrue. Right. And what it does is it leads to a million deaths in Ukraine, which we are supporting, right? And so that's what I mean. The biggest challenge I overcame was recognizing that, as opposed to accepting what we're simply told, it's imperative that we assess what is true about what we're told, what is true about what we believe, and we build our life based on that truth. Otherwise, we find ourselves in a house of cards that invariably falls.
Awesome. So biggest challenge is going through your core values. I love it. In wrapping up, I always have three final questions, and then anything that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure to leave our listeners with. First and final question is, if someone is looking for their purpose, which you've said you found, what's one sentence you could say that could help them find it?
It's going to sound trite. It's you find it you the journey to finding your purpose is staring at you in the mirror.
I love
If
it.
you take a sober look as to who you are and go down that journey, yes, that's when you will start to find your purpose.
Cool. Second question. What's a favorite quote and why?
A favorite quote. Uh, Gosh, that is I don't let me see what a favorite quote and why. I apologize for nothing leaping to the fore. Um okay, I'll default. I'm a passionate lover of music, and I will default to the great musical philosophers um from the Rolling Stones. In their great song, "You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need."
Yeah.
I have found that that quote, that lyric, right, is a way to thread through bizarre times like we're going through in the United States, you know, and, because if you can find that you get what you need, it's where your hope comes from. It's what empowers you to move forward without giving up.
That's good. And number three question, a third and final question is, what's one word or sentence you want on your gravestone?
He lived authentically.
Cool. All right, you run into someone in a coffee shop. They've listened to this, learning about the, climate management and um, our presidential stuff going on in the States, all that kind of good stuff. What's something we didn't touch on that you think would be really impactful for our listeners to live with?
I think it's we live in the information age, and I think it's really incumbent for people to stop assuming whatever their source of information they can trust. We live at a time where this is not a fearful time. It's an empowering time. Check the information. The only way people can lie to you is if you don't check. If you simply say, well, I trust them, and so I accept what they say. This is how we get lied to. And so the most empowering thing I could say to people is please verify the information that you make your decisions on, whether it's in your business, in your relationships, in your life, right? Verify the information, and you will find that you will be empowered to make better choices that serve you in the long run.
I love that. Guys, let's make sure to share this. Let's go out there. If we can change one life or one starfish at a time, together, we can help change the world. Thanks for being on, Kevin.
Oh, it has been a pleasure, Angela. Thank you so much.